Good morning, everyone. Talk awkwardly among yourselves while I pull up the PowerPoint here. So we're going to talk about the cosmological argument. We'll define what that is. If you weren't here last night, then I need to let you know something. If you weren't here, you can tune out for the next 90 seconds. But I want you... Do I have sound, by the way? This team, they scare me how on top of everything that they are. So I make a PDF deck of all my PowerPoint presentations so you can go to my website here. So let me show you how to do that here. Ooh. All right, so you go to richardghowe.com. All right. And then you see at the top there, right up there, is a tab called Resources. You click on that, and it'll give you 4 options. What you're interested in this morning is the PDF decks. So you go to PDF decks there, and it'll give you an alphabetized list of all of the PDF decks that I've put together over the years, teaching courses and speaking. So for our purposes, what you're interested in are the decks on the existence of God. You'll see there's actually 4 different presentations. Actually 5, because one of them is have 2 different things on the teleological argument. So for this morning, what I've done is just selected salient slides just for our time together, specifically with respect to the cosmological argument, whatever that is, as we'll find out. In fact, we'll find out right now. So the name cosmological, when it comes to the cosmological argument, comes from the Greek word kosmos, which is sometimes translated world. So it has the idea of God as the cause of the universe. So any kind of argument that argues for God being the cause of the universe is cosmological. And they're distinct from the others that you'll see, like teleological, which have to do with design or purpose of the universe, or ontological or moral argument, a lot of different kinds of arguments. There's really 2 versions of the cosmological argument I want to touch on. One of them has to do with God as the cause of the beginning of the universe, and the other is God as the cause of the existing of the universe. Now, at this point, that may seem redundant. At this point, that may seem redundant. Oh, sorry. Just wanted to be redundant there. But I'll distinguish the second one in a way that will become clear why I'm segmenting them out from each other. So let's look at the first as God as the cause of the beginning of the universe. What do we mean by that? Well, there's really 2 versions of this, only one of which I'm going to do. One version of showing that God is the beginning of the universe would be philosophical, and it would have to do with trying to show how it is that the past could not be infinite. And it has to do with transfinite math and infinite set theory and Cantorian infinites and, all these Hilbert's hotels. If you're into that kind of stuff, then you need therapy, basically, is what you... But in other words, but we're not going to do that. It's obtuse and complicated, at least it is to me. So I think it's not as exciting as the sort of other version where you try to argue for God as the cause of the beginning of the universe by looking at a lot of the current scientific data that points to the fact that the universe had a beginning. So here's how the argument goes. First of all, the universe began to exist. Whatever begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. So the conclusion follows necessarily. So the responsibility is to try to defend the 2 premises. If the 2 premises are true, the conclusion follows necessarily. So if we take these one at a time and say, well, how do we know the universe began to exist? I want to just share with you a little bit of the scientific information. I'm not a scientist, so I'm just appealing to authorities here. But you can get the deck and chase down the resources. And in fact, there are many more citations than I will take the time to do this morning. I'll just give you maybe 1 or 2 out of each scientific point. But then you can get the deck and look at the primary source, and you can go read some of these scientists yourself. So what is the scientific evidence, if you will, that the universe began to exist? You might find it interesting to know that the idea among scientists that the universe came into existence a finite time ago is relatively recent, probably 20th century. Before that, the general consensus was that the universe was eternal. In fact, the idea of eternal universe goes back to the ancient Greeks. And Christianity really rocked the Roman and Greek world by its notion of creation, or our notion of creation. But things began to change as the scientific evidence began to mount up. Then more and more the indications seemed to point out the fact that the universe actually came into existence a finite time ago. And there are three lines of arguments that scientists can give for the beginning of the universe: the Big Bang Theory, the expansion of the universe, or the expanding universe, and the second law of thermodynamics. So let's look at these one at a time, what they are. First of all, the Big Bang Theory. Oh, wait a minute, sorry. That's the wrong Big Bang Theory. Most of my physics, though, I do get from Sheldon. In case, if you're, that's where I've learned. No, let's do the real Big Bang Theory. First of all, definition. What do we mean? What do scientists mean by Big Bang Theory? Scientists maintain that the universe began in a colossal explosion a finite time ago. So the significance then of the Big Bang Theory is that the universe has not existed from eternity, according to this theory. Therefore, the universe began to exist a finite time ago. Just again, a couple of two or three here and there references to authorities. Stephen Weinberg says, in the beginning there was an explosion, not an explosion like those familiar on Earth, an explosion which occurred simultaneously everywhere, filling all space from the beginning with every particle of matter rushing apart from every other particle. And by the way, some of these resources, in fact, I'm trying to think of one that might not fall into this category. But by and large, most of these scientists that I'm quoting are not trying to leverage some kind of cosmological argument necessarily. They're not trying to weasel their own convictions about God's existence. Some of them don't even believe in the existence of God. In fact, it's very interesting, Robert Jastrow in particular, when he said recent developments in astronomy have implications that may go beyond contributions to science itself. In a nutshell, astronomers studying the universe through their telescopes have been forced to the conclusion that the world began suddenly in a moment of creation as the product of unknown forces. Now, Robert Jastrow is actually an agnostic, and as an astronomer, he became progressively more interested in the peculiar reaction his fellow astronomers were having to this data that seemed to point that that the universe began to exist a finite time ago. Because people were starting to get uneasy, at least some were, because they saw the implications. Well, gee, if the universe came into existence a finite time ago, then it looks like something must have caused that universe, which is itself not the universe. And so Jastrow began to notice the unease accruing among his fellow astronomers. And in fact, he wrote a book about it titled God and the Astronomers. And the book ends with this very commonly quoted paragraph that you see in a lot of apologetics books. He's again chronicling, here's how we come to believe the universe began to exist. Here's how my fellow astronomers are uneasy about the implications. And he said the story ends like a bad dream. As the scientists are scaling the mountains of ignorance, they pull themselves over the top only to be greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. Now, he's saying that as an agnostic, and you might ask, well, why did he remain an agnostic? He was actually asked that question in an interview because he's marshaling all this evidence. Hey, it looks like something started the universe a finite time ago that is itself not the universe, and, we all know who we're talking about, kind of thing. And they said, well, why are you still an agnostic? And he more or less just gave psychological reasons. He was almost like, well, I think it's just the way I was brought up. It's almost like my mind just won't let me believe in anything that's not physical. So it was a sort of a sad commentary. It's almost as if part of him was telling him there must be a God that caused all this, but another part of him was blocking that conclusion. I don't know if he ever came to terms with his maker before he died, but I appreciate his candor as an agnostic. Stephen Hawking, probably the most famous scientist of our day who just passed away this year, said almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. What's another piece of evidence that the universe began to exist? Well, the expanding universe. What is that? Well, the definition that scientists give is that they maintain that every object in the universe is moving away from every other object such that even space itself is expanding. Now I have trouble with this because I'm always having trouble finding a parking space. I figured if the universe is expanding, what am I having, can it just expand a little bit more so I can get in here? So the universe, according to the scientists, is expanding. What's the significance? The significance is the universe could not have been expanding from all eternity, otherwise it would be infinitely dispersed, which at length of time it would be infinitely dispersed, which again it's not. Therefore, the universe began to exist. Its expansion began a finite time ago. Another appeal to authority, George Gamow says the entire space of the universe, populated by billions of galaxies, is in a state of rapid expansion with all its members flying away from one another at high speed. Albert Einstein says Hubble's discovery can, therefore, be considered to some extent as a confirmation of the theory of an expansion of space. Again, so if it's expanding, it couldn't have been expanding from eternity past, otherwise it would be infinitely expanded. Therefore, it must have begun to expand a finite time ago. And then the third line of scientific argument is the second law of thermodynamics. What does it say? All isolated systems will tend towards a state of maximum disorder. What? It's called entropy. Another way to say it is in an isolated system, the amount of energy available to do work decreases and becomes uniform. So an isolated system is a system into which no energy is being put. So left to its own devices, your cell phone will eventually run down. Indeed, that's the way you can say it. The universe is running down. And the only way to counter your cell phone from running down is you have to put energy into it. So the significance then of this idea of thermodynamics is that the universe could not have been running down from eternity, otherwise it would have run down by now, which is not. Therefore, the universe began to exist a finite time ago. Now, someone may say, well, maybe the universe has some kind of infinite repository of energy. And we go, yeah, that's kind of what we're suggesting is actually the case. We call that God. So if you start trying to qualify the scenario to allow for things like infinite energy input, then you're starting to inch a little bit closer of what we're trying to argue, that there is some kind of being of infinite power. Rudolf Clausius, who actually formulated the second law of thermodynamics, said this: we can express the fundamental laws of the universe which correspond to the two fundamental laws of the mechanical theory of heat in the following simple form. The energy of the universe is constant. The entropy of the universe tends towards a maximum. So entropy is this state of disorder. So as entropy increases, that means energy to do work is running down. In fact, I want to put a sign on my door that just says Department of Entropy to explain why my office is always so messy all the time. Or either that or Department of Redundancy Department, which I want to have that one too. So Robert Jastrow says the laws of thermodynamics point to the conclusion, or point to one conclusion, that the universe had a beginning. So the evidence of the Big Bang shows the universe has not always existed, therefore the universe began to exist a finite time ago. The evidence for the expansion of the universe shows that the universe could not have been expanding from eternity, therefore the universe began to exist a finite time ago. And the evidence of the second law of thermodynamics shows that the universe could not have been running down from eternity, therefore the universe began to exist a finite time ago. So the expanding universe, second law of thermodynamics, Big Bang theory, all point to the conclusion of that premise, namely the universe began to exist. Now what about the second premise? Whatever begins to exist has a cause of its existence. There is many senses in which defending this premise actually gets philosophical. And I don't want to get into that because I think everyone would then go take a coffee break right now, and poke their eyes out with ice picks or ears out with ice picks or whatever. But when you're talking the scientific evidence, as I've been doing, in my experience at least, one of the last things a scientist wants to give up is the idea of causality, because the notion of the natural sciences depends so heavily on the fact that things don't just happen capriciously, but they happen because of discernible regularities that we can identify and say, well, water freezes at 0 degrees today, and we'll do that because we believe in this uniformity of nature and these kind of things. So typically, you find very few people who would challenge the idea that something could begin to exist uncaused. But you will hear some scientists bring up this specter of virtual particles. And so that gets thrown around on the internet by amateurs, that somehow, well, scientists have discovered that there are these quantum particles that seemingly come into existence uncaused and then just go out of existence. I've got some material on that in one of the decks, so you can just pour through those to get some great quotes. But the short version is this idea that scientists have discovered particles that seemingly come into existence uncaused is just false. That's not even what scientists are saying about virtual particles. Because whatever virtual particles are, they only occur in certain very restricted quantum conditions. And they only happen right there, which already begins to tell you, well, it's not like they're just popping in and out of existence willy-nilly. It's not like we're going to be sitting here and all of a sudden an elephant's just going to pop into existence because of virtual particles. So what happens because of things like the internet, people parlay these kind of quasi-scientific theories that's not even what the scientists are saying, and then try to say, oh, no, things pop into existence uncaused. That's no big deal, so maybe the universe is some big virtual particle. So I'll just commend to you the deck. You go get the deck. There's some great citations there that I won't take the time to go through. Besides the fact that 99 times out of 10, scientists won't challenge the causality. Did you get that? Did you get the 99? Okay, good, because nobody laughed. I just wasn't sure if I was talking too fast. So it follows then, it seems to me, that if the universe began to exist a finite time ago, and everything that begins to exist has a cause, then the universe has a cause. Now people can go, well, how do we know this cause is God? And I appreciate the question, but think about it. If you're able to prove to somebody that there is some thing that is beyond the universe, which means if it created or caused the universe, which is time, space, and matter, then whatever that cause is isn't temporal, isn't spatial, and isn't material. So if it has feathers and a flat beak and it quacks and it floats around on lakes, it sounds like a duck, right? So if we're talking about some being of unimaginable power that is non-material and non-spatial and non-temporal, then that's pretty much what most of us have meant by God. We can go on to massage the conversation as to whether this God is good, whether he's the God of Christianity versus some other deity. Those are fair questions to ask. And in my judgment, I don't think this version of the argument really settles all of those additional questions. I actually wrote my master's thesis on this argument here. And I concentrated not on the scientific evidence, but on that mathematical evidence. And in my thesis, I tried to deal with objections like those to say, well, how do you know this God still exists? Maybe he existed when he caused the universe and then he went out of existence. So how do you know he exists now? How do you know he's good? How do you know he has all these superlative attributes that we say, omniscient, omnipotent? How do you know those things? And I tried to deal with those. Some of them I admitted, I don't think the argument settles that. I don't think it does settle whether this being, this cause is good versus something else. I don't think the argument as such addresses that. But still, in my experience, if you get somebody to the point where they've concluded there's some kind of being that caused the universe a finite time ago, they're pretty much willing to concede that sounds like what everybody has understood to be God. But because of those sort of missing elements as a philosopher, I tend to gravitate more towards a philosophical kind of argument. So I take a cue from one of my favorite philosophers of the 20th century named Joseph Owens, who compares these sort of non-philosophical arguments and how much they do or don't deliver with the philosophical arguments he's been discussing in context that he thinks do go ahead and just answer all of these other questions. He says, other arguments may vividly suggest the existence of God, press it home eloquently to human consideration, and for most people provide much greater spiritual and religious aid than difficult metaphysical demonstrations. But on the philosophical level, these arguments are open to rebuttal and refutation, for they're not philosophically cogent. So I'll commend to your reading Joseph Owens' article, which you can get on my website. I'm pointing like it's still up there. It's not up there anymore, but at any rate, you remember the tabs, you click on resources, go to papers, and just scroll down, and you can get Joseph Owens' article, Aquinas and the 5 Ways. So the 5 ways are 5 famous arguments, really short arguments that Thomas Aquinas gives for the existence of God. He's discussing those and trying to unpack them. So as I've already hinted at then, this one is an argument that comes out of Thomas Aquinas, God as the cause of the existing of the universe. So there's Thomas right there in all his corpulent glory there. God as the cause of the existing of the universe. Notice it's the existing of the universe, not the existence. The key here is going to be, as I'll summarize here as we go along, the key to look for is that this argument that Aquinas gives is relatively indifferent as to whether the universe ever began to exist. That is, the way he's formulating his argument, even if the universe was eternal, it's still going to need a sustaining cause that's causing it in its current existing, not just coming into existence. All right, so watch for that as we go through some of this argument. Now, this is philosophical, so I just apologize in advance that it's philosophical. The reason I do this, though, even if it's like drinking from a fire hose, where all of a sudden these categories get introduced and you hadn't had time to percolate on them and marinate in them a little bit to get them lodged in your mind before the next one comes up, I hope that at the very least it'll pique your curiosity to go, this sounds interesting, and I might want to consider what else I can learn about it. So I'll actually give some suggested readings at the end. As time allows, I'll suggest some readings for you, and you can get those again from the deck. So this argument demonstrates not that there is a cause of the universe's beginning to exist, but that there is a cause of its current existing. It employs a distinction in philosophy known as the essence-existence distinction. Okay? So buckle up, and let me summarize this for you. It's actually not that hard. It's just that the categories might be unfamiliar, and that's what makes it, you have to kind of, again, think about it a while. But the concepts themselves are not particularly, I think, beyond the average grown-up to get. So how do we distinguish essence and existence? Well, a thing's essence is just what it is. It's that about a thing in terms of which it is the kind of thing that it is. So you're a human because you have a human essence, or sometimes you might hear the word nature. I have a human nature. And so that's what makes you human. Your existence, as Aquinas will argue here in a moment, is that it is. So he's going to say there's a difference between what something is and then that it is. Let's unpack that a little bit. So in a created object, now you might think, okay, now I'm hedging my bets because I've already introduced creation here, but we're just framing this in a way that it will exclude God here as we get to the point. There's a real distinction between that thing's essence and its existence. How do we know this? Well, because there are things that you may know that it is, but you don't know what it is. Okay, this is a hideous-looking moth in the U.S. Thankfully, they're not that common. That has these really ugly tentacles that come out of the end of its abdomen that I think it's some kind of mating ritual that it does. And they're hairy and they're ugly. Now, as you see this picture, you go, if I didn't say anything about it, you just go, what in the world is that? And I say, well, we have these in the U.S. And right there you go, okay, well, I know that it is. At least I trust Richard when he tells me that it is. But I don't know what it is. So right there, your intellect is able to distinguish that something exists without really knowing what something is. But you could go the other way and say, I know something, and I know what it is, and I know that it doesn't exist, like Bilbo Baggins. You know exactly what Bilbo is. If somebody asks you, well, what is Bilbo? Well, he's a hobbit. Well, what's a hobbit? Well, and you can go on to describe a hobbit. Well, is that the same as a human? No. Aragorn was a human. He's different from a hobbit, and they're both different from this creature and that creature. And your intellect is able to understand the whatness of these things at the same time that it knows that they actually don't have existence. We can even talk about things and know what they are that used to have existence and now don't have existence, like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So it's very common, I think, it's just second nature almost, that our intellect is able to distinguish between existence and essence. So let's see how this can be construed as an argument for God's existence. Consider yourself as a human being. Your essence is what makes you a human. Your existence is what makes you a being. And for most of these points, I have philosophical quotes, largely from Aquinas, though some are from other philosophers. I'm going to skip those for the sake of time. You can get the deck where Aquinas says this, that, and the other, because this is his argument. So given that, your humanness, your essence is what makes you human, and your existence is what makes you a being. Now consider this. Whatever is true about you is true either because of your essence or not. I'll give you an example. And by the way, if this picture looks familiar, it's because I modeled for it. It's like, wasn't that the guy that spoke it? Except he had clothes on that day, you know. But let's take an example of something that's caused by your essence. The reason you have rationality is because you're human. Aristotle thought this was unique among humans. Aquinas thought the same thing. And the Christians, I thought, well, I think that's exactly right. It's part of what it is to be made in the image of God. We have free will. We've got rationality. We have intellect that distinguishes us from animals who are largely just instinctual, and certainly distinguishes both animals and humans from plants that are just nutritive, but they don't have sentientness and they don't have consciousness. But we have more than just consciousness. We've got intellect. We got rationality. We got free will. And so, without much argument, I would just say that's unique to us. Well, where does my rationality come from? Well, I have rationality because I'm human. It's my humanness that makes me rational. It's part of your essence as a human to have rationality. You have rationality by virtue of being human. Rationality is caused by your essence. Just 4 different ways of saying the same thing. All right? So, want to make sure it doesn't. Is this being recorded, by the way? Because they're like MP3s. So they're like these awkward silences in the middle. And people are going to say, I've got a bad MP3 because it's like this big blank area. I say, sorry, we were handing out thousands of rands to all the... So if you're listening to this MP3, you missed it at the conference. You should have been there. All right, so where does this go? Well, what about something like this? Suppose you're here at the church. Presumably you're all here today. Is the reason you're here at Summerstrand United Church, is it because you're a human? Is that why you're here? Or another way to ask it, is it part of your essence? Or if you like better, although this can be misleading, is it part of the definition of human to be at this church? Are you here? Is that caused by your essence? And I would submit to you, no, of course not. Otherwise, you weren't a human before you got here. You won't be a human after you leave, and all the other people who aren't here aren't human. So it's not part of what it is to be human to be here. Well, then why are you able to be here despite the fact it's not part of your essence? Well, the answer is pretty simple. I can cause myself to be here. I got motor nerves, and I can walk, and I can make a decision. So, in other words, there can be things true about you that aren't like your rationality that are true by your essence. They're true because you can just cause them to be true. Now, there may be things also that are true about you that was caused by somebody else. So where'd you get that black eye? Did you give it to yourself? No, somebody gave it to me. You know, or the sun could give you a tan, for example. So you can think of things that aren't true of you by definition. They're not part of your essence, yet they're still true of you because you can cause them to be true of you, or somebody else can cause them to be true of you. Well, given that then, instead of your rationality or risibility, which I skipped, risibility is just the capacity for laughter, and I skipped that for time. And now I'm using up all the time that I would have said by telling you what the risibility was that I didn't talk about. So now we're right back where we were. Or being at Summerstrand United Church, consider your existence. Consider the fact that you are existing right now. Is the reason you exist because you're a human? Is it part of the definition of human to exist? Well, we already know that's not, because we know humans that don't exist, like Aragorn or Sherlock Holmes, or any number of fictional characters. They don't exist, yet they're human in terms of their essence. Is it part of your essence to exist? No. Do you exist by virtue of being human? No. Is your existence caused by your essence? No. But if you're not the cause of your own existence, then your existence must be caused by something else, right? That seems pretty straightforward. And most of you are probably going, yeah, I can see that. I can't cause my own existence, Therefore, it must have been caused by something else. But be careful. Don't fall back into, I can't cause myself to come into existence. That's certainly true. But we're saying something slightly different. I'm going to argue, yeah, but you're also not the cause of your current existing right now. Well, I haven't really said much of defending that. That seems kind of peculiar. So we'll get to that here in due course. What about the thing then that's causing your existence right now? What about its existence? Was it caused by something else, and then it's either existing by virtue of its essence or it's caused by something else? And so the question then becomes that everyone asks, well, can this go to infinity? Can you have a thing that's causing the existing of a thing that's causing the existing thing, causing all the way back to infinity? Now again, let me warn you, we're not talking about just causing something to come into existence, and that was caused to come into existence. We're not talking. We're talking about some kind of current causality. So let me unpack that very quickly for us. Just some comments on existence. Suppose you saw a giant glass ball. I took this picture in Venice, Italy. And it was beautiful, and I thought, hey, this would be great for a cosmological argument. No, I didn't think that. So if you saw this giant glass ball, you could ask, how did that come to be? And if somebody said, well, you know, on Murano, one of the provinces of Venice where they blow all the glass, they blew all these little glass balls, and then they put them in a cage, and then they floated it over here, and then they set it up, and they plugged it in, and it lights up. And you're satisfied with that explanation. But this is an analogy to existence. Suppose instead of seeing the glass ball, you were hearing music right now. You were hearing music. You would not ask, how did that music come to be, like you ask about the ball? Instead, you would be asking, what is causing the music right now? Do you see the difference? Because unlike the glass ball by analogy, that you can understand it coming into existence, music only is music as it is being caused to be music at every instance that is music. As soon as the cause of the music stops causing the music is just non-existent. So by analogy, Aquinas and other philosophers just say, it's sort of like a thing's existence is some kind of act, is some kind of action that they're undergoing. They're just existing constantly. This sort of symphony that's being played. Now, so compare the difference in two different kind of causal chains. Suppose you've got a person. Now, I realize that it takes more than a man to have a baby, okay? But just for the sake of clarity and because it fits my picture, we're talking about a father who sires a child, Nevertheless, I know that it takes more than a father. But you have a father who sires a child who has a child who has a child. Now think about the causal relationship here. Did my little pointer thing? All right. Notice the causal relationship. Well, when this guy over here causes the baby, this guy right here is not causally involved, right? All he did is cause him to come into existence. He could cease to exist, and that guy could still sire a child. So he causes him to be a man, but he doesn't cause him to be a father, right? Do you see the difference? So this chain, according to Aquinas, he didn't see any problem with that being infinite. I have a problem with it being infinite, but we'll table that conversation for now. I can understand each one of the causes is just relatively independent of each other as it goes down the chain. But compare that to a hand pushing a stick, pushing a rock. It's not only the case that the hand causes the stick to move or to push, and it's not just the case that the stick is causing the rock to move, but the hand is causing the stick to be a mover of the rock. Do you see the difference? It's not just the hand causes the stick to move and then the hand is out of the picture. It's not that the hand just causes the stick to move. It causes the stick to be a mover of the rock. Unlike the man who causes his son, but he doesn't cause his son to be a father of a son. He just causes his son to come into existence. Is that clear as mud to everybody? So there's some kind of continuous, simultaneous causal chain going through. Or maybe a better example would be a train, a boxcars, and they're all moving. To me, they're going right to left. I'm not sure why that is, but at any rate. And so you say, well, what's moving this boxcar? Well, the boxcar in front of it. Well, what's moving that boxcar? Well, the boxcar in front of it. And you try to go, well, eventually you would say something has to be a mover of the train. just an infinite number of boxcars won't explain the motion, which is simultaneous all at once through the entire chain. Or I like even better this illustration. Imagine a bunch of interlocking gears that are turning. It's not just merely that one gear causes the gear next to it to move and turn. It's that the entire range of gears are all simultaneously in motion, all at once. If you pulled a gear out, the whole thing would just stop, wouldn't it? So there has to be something in the chain whose very nature is to cause that chain to be turning or to cause that train to be moving. And so the argument is there must be something whose very essence is existence itself, that he exists by virtue of its very nature, what theologians call aseity, the doctrine of aseity. Anything that exists that does not exist by virtue of its essence must be continually caused to exist by something whose essence is existence itself. And it must be the case that the existence of the universe is caused by something whose essence is its existence. Or another way to say it is, for whom there is no essence, existence, distinction. Now, let me say, well, how does that give us God? There's a great illustration I got from one of my students subsequent to his being a student. He wrote this later in his academic career. I just call it the balloon illustration because it has to do with the balloon. I'm just a paragon of creativity here. All right, so this is an illustration. Imagine blowing up a balloon. The air in the balloon expands to fill the balloon up to the extent of and according to the shape of the balloon, right? So the air is like the existing of the balloon, and the skin of the balloon is like the nature of a thing. So by parallel, the act of existing of a creature fills up to the extent of and according to the shape of the essence of that creature. So, for example, take a man on horseback. This is iconic John Wayne for the Western movies in the U.S. A horse that he's riding on contains all of the perfections of existence up to the extent of and according to the limitations of the essence of horse, which excludes rationality, excludes free will, and other kinds of perfections. A human contains all the perfections of existence up to the extent of and according to the limits of the essence human, which does include rationality but might exclude other perfections. So, if you've got a being whose very essence is its own existence, then it exists without any limits at all in all of its perfections. Historically, this is where most of these, I'm trying to think of one that doesn't, attributes of God come from, what we call the classical attributes. How do we know God is omnipotent, omniscient, all-loving, all-powerful? How do we build that argument? And I think the way to do it is through some classical metaphysics or philosophy that shows that this being whose essence is its own existence exists in infinite perfection in every way because it's not limited by some kind of external essence. So let me just suggest a few resources if you're still awake here. What you'll notice on the decks is there's some resources that are debates in print. You can get some of those, but let me skip to some that are a little bit more to the point. Here's some that are kind of an intermediate. J.P. Moreland, Scaling the Secular City. You can get all these from the deck, so you don't have to worry about writing them down. Edward Fazer's The Last Superstition. Another former student of mine, Frank Turek, Stealing from God. J. Warner Wallace. I'll actually be with these gentlemen next week. Excited about a conference in Dallas, Texas, who was a cold case detective. I'll have to tell you about him. Who Designed the Designer? And then if you're really hardcore, I know there's at least one philosopher out here. There may be many more, but only one was willing to admit it publicly. But you can get some of these advanced, and then I'm done. There's Robert Spitzer's New Proofs for the Existence of God, Contributions of Contemporary Physics and Philosophy. My favorite, this is one of the most incredible books I've read in the past few years, is Gavin Kerr's Aquinas' Way to God. It's cool for two reasons. One, because he has black hair halfway down his back. Okay, so I vicariously have long hair through other people because I used to be a long-haired rock and roll drummer in the 70s. But he also has a Frodo shirt on, which I think is kind of cool. Edward Fazer, 5 Proofs of the Existence of God. James Dolezal, All That Is in God. Evangelical Theology and the Challenge of Classical Christian Theism. And then Joseph Owens, whom you met earlier. St. Thomas Aquinas on the Existence of God. And then last is Maurice Holloway's An Introduction to Natural Theology. And the interesting thing about Maurice Holloway is he actually was blurry in real life. This is actually a perfect picture of a... The picture's not blurry. Maurice was blurry. Anyway, so you got questions? We can deal with those later. Thank you.